"Mom, I can't come home for Christmas." The words were a ghost of a whisper, lost in the biting December wind, whipping through the service alley behind Aurelia, Manhattan's most exclusive new restaurant. Elara Vance pressed the cold phone to her ear, her body trembling not just from the chill, but from the weight of the confession. Each puff of her breath bloomed white in the frigid air, a fleeting testament to the life inside her, a life that felt impossibly heavy. Snowflakes, fat and lazy, began to drift down from the bruised purple sky, catching in her dark hair. They were the kind of snowflakes that belonged on a Christmas card, the kind that promised cozy nights by a fire, the scent of pine needles and roasting turkey. For Elara, they were tiny, frozen daggers of guilt. Home was a small, clapboard house in snowy Vermont, a world away from the relentless concrete canyons of New York City. Home was her mother, Eleanor, whose laugh was the warmest sound Elara had ever known. At 22, Elara had learned the brutal arithmetic of dreams. The tuition for her gemology program at the GIA was a mountain she chipped away at with a teaspoon. Her days were a frantic blur of classes, studying the intricate world of inclusions and carrots, followed by long evenings serving coffee and pie at a bustling midtown diner. Nights like this one, working a private catering event at a place like Aurelia, were supposed to be the windfalls, the extra cash that would close the gap. But life, as it so often did, had presented a new, insurmountable equation. The phone crackled. "Oh, sweetie." Eleanor's voice was thin, stretched across the hundreds of miles between them. "Is everything all right?" Elara squeezed her eyes shut, picturing her mother in their small kitchen, probably kneading dough for her famous Christmas stolen. The radio playing carols softly in the background. The image was so clear, so painful, it felt like a physical blow. "The furnace, Mum. I know you said the repairman was coming." "He came," Eleanor said, a forced cheerfulness in her tone that broke Elara's heart. "Fixed her right up. Just a little pricier than we'd hoped." A little pricier. Elara knew her mother's code. It meant catastrophic. It meant the money Elara had painstakingly saved for her plane ticket, every dollar earned from double shifts and extra tips, had been wired to Vermont 2 days ago without a second thought. It was the only choice. A warm house for her mother wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity against the harsh New England winter. A plane ticket home was just a wish. "I'm so sorry, Mum. I tried everything. I picked up this extra gig tonight. But even with that," her voice broke, the professional composure she maintained for wealthy patrons shattering into a million tiny pieces. "The last-minute flights they're just impossible." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hiss of the city and the soft static of the phone line. Elara could feel her mother's disappointment, as if it were her own. This would have been their first Christmas together in 3 years, since Elara had moved to the city with a suitcase full of textbooks and her grandfather's old jeweler's loupe tucked safely in her pocket. "It's okay, baby girl," Eleanor finally whispered, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. "We'll have other Christmases. You just work hard and stay warm. I love you, Mum. I love you more than all the stars in the winter sky." After she hung up, Elara didn't move. She leaned her head against the cold brick wall, the rough texture a strange comfort against her cheek. Tears she'd refused to shed during the call now streamed down her face, freezing almost instantly. She was a tiny, insignificant figure in an alley behind a palace of indulgence, a place where the wine being poured for the guests inside cost more than her monthly rent. The injustice of it all, the sheer, dumb luck of the universe, felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She didn't hear the heavy fire door groan open behind her. She didn't notice the tall, imposing figure that stepped out into the alley, wrapped in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than her entire GIA tuition. Julian Croft needed air. The cloying scent of expensive perfume, the false laughter, the predatory gleam in his future father-in-law's eyes. It was all suffocating. He was standing on the precipice of the biggest merger of his career, a deal that would solidify his empire for the next 50 years. And all he felt was a cold, creeping dread. His engagement to Tiffany Sterling was a business arrangement, a distasteful but necessary component of the deal. He knew it. Her father, the calculating Alistair Sterling, knew it. The only person who seemed to believe in the fairy tale was Tiffany herself, and even Julian suspected her belief was rooted more in the carat weight of her ring than any genuine affection. He stepped into the alley, the frigid air a welcome shock to his system. And then he saw her. A young woman, one of the catering staff by her simple black uniform, crying silently against the wall. His first instinct, honed by years of navigating a world full of opportunists, was one of cynical dismissal, a sob story in the making. Someone looking for a handout from one of the wealthy patrons. He'd seen it 100 times. He was about to turn and go back inside when he heard the small, choked sob and the whispered words, meant for no one but the uncaring brick wall. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I'm trying, I really am." The words were so raw, so devoid of artifice, that they pierced through his armor of cynicism. It wasn't a performance. It was pure, unadulterated despair. He found himself walking toward her, his expensive leather shoes crunching softly on the thin layer of snow. "Are you all right?" His voice was deeper, rougher than he intended. Ilara jumped, startled, wiping furiously at her tears with the back of her hand. She looked up at the man towering over her, his face half hidden in the shadows cast by the single security light. He was handsome in a severe, intimidating way, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that seemed to see right through her. She recognized him instantly. He was the man of the hour, the billionaire fiancé, Julian Croft. Mortification washed over her, hot and swift. "I'm fine, I'm so sorry. I'm on my break. I'll go back in." She stumbled over the words, her face burning with shame. "You're clearly not fine," he stated. Not unkindly, but with a bluntness that was disarming. He studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp and analytical. "Trouble at home?" Ilara just nodded, unable to speak. What could she possibly say to this man? Her problems were on a different planet from his. Her financial crisis was probably the equivalent of what he'd find between his sofa cushions. He reached into his coat, pulling out a thick, leather wallet. He extracted several $100 bills and held them out to her. "Here, for your trouble." It was meant as a solution, a simple transaction to fix a problem. But to Ilara it felt like the ultimate dismissal. It reduced her genuine heartbreak to a simple inconvenience that could be bought off. A lifetime of quiet pride, instilled by a mother who scrubbed floors to make ends meet, and a grandfather who took more pride in a perfectly set stone than a hefty price tag, surged through her. She looked from the money to his impassive face, and for the first time that night, the tears stopped. A spark of defiance lit her eyes. "No, thank you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Julian's eyebrows rose in surprise. He wasn't used to being refused. "I insist. Whatever it is, this should help." "My problems aren't for sale, Mr. Croft," she said, lifting her chin. "And neither is my dignity. I appreciate the thought, but I am not a charity case. I was just having a private moment." She turned to leave, her back ramrod straight. The sheer, unexpected force of her refusal stopped him cold. In his world, everyone had a price. Everyone wanted something. This young woman, who was clearly in distress, had just turned down what was likely a week's pay for her, all for a principle. It was illogical. It was intriguing. "Wait," he called out. "What's your name?" She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "Elara." "Elara," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "You have more character than anyone in that ballroom." Before she could process the strange compliment, she slipped back inside, leaving Julian Croft alone in the snow-dusted alley, a fan of $100 bills still in his hand, a flicker of something unidentifiable, respect, perhaps, dawning in his cold, calculating eyes. Back inside the glittering ballroom of Aurelia, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and champagne. Elara moved through the crowd of designer gowns and bespoke suits like a ghost, her face a mask of professional neutrality. But her encounter in the alley had changed something. The glittering artifice of the room now seemed sharper, more brittle. She saw the desperation behind the dazzling smiles, the cold calculations in the warm handshakes. Her duties were simple: keep the champagne flutes full, remove empty plates, be invisible. It was a role she was used to. But tonight, she found her eyes being drawn, again and again, to the center of the room, where Tiffany Sterling was holding court. Tiffany was a masterpiece of calculated perfection. Her platinum blonde hair was swept into an elegant chignon, her dress a column of shimmering silver that clung to her like a second skin. But her true centerpiece was the ring. It was an enormous, cushion-cut blue diamond, a stone so large and so vivid it seemed to pull all the light in the room toward it. It flashed and glittered with every languid gesture of her hand, a beacon of obscene wealth. As Elara refilled a glass nearby, she overheard Tiffany's tinkling laugh. "Julian is just too generous," she was saying to a circle of fawning admirers. "It's the star of the Aegean. Apparently, it has a history as long and dramatic as the Greek myths themselves." Elara froze, the champagne bottle hovering over a glass. The star of the Aegean. Even a first-year GIA student knew the name. It was a legendary stone, a flawless, deep blue diamond of impossible rarity, rumored to have been lost for over a century. If this was it was a piece of history. It was priceless. Her professional curiosity piqued. She allowed herself a closer look as she moved past the group. And that's when she saw it. It was a tiny detail, something no one else in this room would ever notice. The fire, the way the stone broke the light into spectral colors, was wrong. It was too brilliant, too flashy. A natural blue diamond of that saturation would have a deeper, more subtle fire, a velvety quality that this stone lacked. This one had the glassy, almost frantic brilliance of a synthetic. "Impossible," she thought, shaking her head. "You're tired and upset. You're seeing things." She tried to dismiss it, to focus on her work, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Throughout the evening, she found herself observing the ring, her mind running through textbook examples and lecture notes. The dispersion was too high. The color, under the specific halogen lights of the ballroom, seemed just a shade too uniform, lacking the subtle zoning one would expect in a natural stone of that size. She remembered a lesson from her favorite professor, Dr. Albright, a man who spoke of gemstones as if they were living beings with souls. "A natural stone tells a story," he'd said, his eyes twinkling behind his thick glasses. "It has flaws, inclusions, quirks of its birth deep within the earth. A synthetic stone has a perfect but empty narrative. It's all climax, no character development." This ring was all climax. Her attention shifted to Tiffany's father, Alistair Sterling, who stood beside Julian, a proprietary hand on his future son-in-law's shoulder. Sterling was a man who smiled with his mouth, but not his eyes. He had the predatory stillness of a shark, and Ilara watched as he steered Julian from one powerful investor to another, showcasing his daughter and the ring as if they were assets in a portfolio. Julian, for his part, looked increasingly trapped, his face a mask of polite indifference that barely concealed a simmering tension. The climax of the evening was the official engagement announcement. Alistair Sterling tapped a spoon against his champagne glass, calling for silence. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Tonight we celebrate not just the union of two wonderful young people, my daughter Tiffany and the brilliant Julian Croft, but the union of two great families, a joining of vision, of legacy." He gestured to Tiffany, who preened under the spotlight. And what better symbol of that legacy than this magnificent piece of history? She held up her hand, and the blue diamond flashed, drawing a collective gasp from the crowd. The star of the Aegean, a stone as rare and as perfect as their love. Julian's smile was a tight, bloodless line. He looked out over the sea of faces, and his eyes, for a fleeting second, met Ilara's as she stood near the back wall. In that brief moment, she saw not a billionaire titan of industry, but a man drowning in a gilded cage. It was then that Tiffany, emboldened by the attention and several glasses of champagne, let her mean streak show. A young waiter, nervous and clumsy, stumbled nearby, sloshing a drop of water onto the hem of her silver dress. "You idiot!" Tiffany shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "Do you have any idea what this dress costs? It's probably more than your entire pathetic life is worth." The young man turned beet red, stammering apologies. The room fell into an awkward silence. Alistair Sterling looked momentarily annoyed at his daughter's lack of composure, while Julian's expression hardened into something resembling granite. Ilara felt a hot surge of anger on the waiter's behalf. She moved forward with a tray of fresh champagne glasses, hoping to diffuse the situation. As she offered one to Tiffany, the blonde's venomous gaze fell on her. "And what are you looking at?" Tiffany sneered, her eyes raking over Ilara's simple black uniform. Her gaze then snagged on the small, silver pendant Ilara wore. It was a simple, unassuming piece, a small, perfectly clear quartz crystal her grandfather, the jeweler, had cut for her himself. It was her most prized possession. "Oh, look," Tiffany said with a cruel laugh, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The help has jewelry. How quaint. I'm sure that little piece of glass has a very sentimental story. But do try to keep your cheap trinkets away from my ring. I wouldn't want it to get scratched." The insult was a spark landing in a tinderbox of righteous indignation. It wasn't just about her, or the waiter, or the painful phone call with her mother. It was about the casual cruelty of it all, the arrogant assumption that wealth equated to worth. It was about the lie, the big, glittering, blue lie on Tiffany's finger. In that moment, Ilara made a decision. She wasn't a waitress anymore, she was a gemologist, and she was about to give a master class. She took a steadying breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked not at Tiffany, but directly at Julian Croft. "It's a beautiful ring," Ilara said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the residual awkwardness in the room. "The craftsmanship of the setting is exquisite." Tiffany looked momentarily pleased, assuming it was a compliment born of intimidation. "Of course it is. It's Cartier." "The stone, however," Ilara continued, her gaze unwavering on Julian, "is even more remarkable. A cushion cut of that size and clarity. It's a modern marvel." Alistair Sterling stepped forward, a wary look in his eyes. "It's not modern, young lady. It's an antique, the Star of the Aegean." "That's the thing about the Star of the Aegean," Ilara said, her voice gaining confidence as she stepped fully into her field of expertise. "It was famous for its unique inclusions, a small, nebula-like cluster that was its fingerprint. It was also known for its distinct pleochroism, showing flashes of greyish-blue from certain angles. This stone—" She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. "This stone is internally flawless, and its color is perfectly uniform from every angle. The dispersion, the way it splits light, is also exceptionally high, almost too perfect." A murmur went through the crowd. This was no longer a waitress making small talk. This was an expert delivering a lecture. Tiffany's face began to pale. Alistair's smile had vanished, replaced by a thunderous scowl. "What are you implying?" he snarled. Julian Croft, who had been watching this entire exchange with a hawk-like intensity, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it commanded the attention of the entire room. "She's not implying anything, Alistair. She's making an observation. Please, Ilara, continue." He had given her the floor. He was listening. He was taking her seriously. Ilara reached into the small pocket of her apron and pulled out her grandfather's loupe, the small, powerful magnifying glass that was the tool of her trade. It was a gesture of pure professionalism. "With all due respect, sir," she said, addressing Alistair but keeping her focus on Julian, "a natural, untreated blue diamond of this saturation would be a Type 2B diamond, a semiconductor of electricity. But its most defining characteristic, beyond its rarity, is its story, the story told by its journey from the Earth's mantle. This stone tells the story of a laboratory. It has the telltale signs of a high-pressure, high-temperature synthetic. An incredible one, mind you, probably worth a significant amount. But it is not the Star of the Aegean. It is, scientifically speaking, an imposter." The silence that followed was absolute, a deafening void where the cheerful party had been seconds before. Tiffany let out a small, strangled gasp, staring at the ring on her finger as if it were a venomous snake. Alistair Sterling's face was a mask of purple rage. "This is outrageous! An accusation from a nobody, a waitress! Julian, are you going to stand for this? She's insulting your fiancé! She's insulting me!" But Julian wasn't looking at Alistair. He was looking at Ilara. He saw no malice in her eyes, no greed, no opportunism. He saw only the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that she is telling the truth. All his own simmering suspicions about the Sterlings, about the too-good-to-be-true clauses in the merger agreement, about the faint whiff of desperation he'd sensed from Alistair for months, suddenly coalesced into a single, horrifying certainty. The ring wasn't just a fake. It was a symbol, a test, a fraud at the very heart of their proposed partnership. Ilara hadn't just exposed a counterfeit diamond. She had exposed the entire rotten foundation of the deal he was about to sign. He slowly turned his gaze from Ilara to Alistair Sterling, and for the first time that night, a genuine expression crossed his face. It was an expression of pure, glacial fury. "Get out," he said, his voice lethally soft. "What?" Alistair sputtered. "Both of you," Julian's voice rose, laced with steel. "Take your lab-grown diamond and your fraudulent merger proposal and get out of my sight. Now." He looked over at his head of security, a large man who had been watching from the wings. "Marcus, escort the Sterlings from the premises, and make sure you get a photo of that ring. We'll be sending it to my legal team, along with a full transcript of Mr. Sterling's claims about its provenance." Panic erupted on Tiffany's face. "Julian, darling, this is a misunderstanding. She's lying. She's just some jealous little nobody." But her words were hollow, her protests frantic. The truth was written all over her father's face, in the beads of sweat forming on his brow and the panicked darting of his eyes. Marcus and another security guard moved in, flanking the Sterlings with grim professionalism. The party was over. As the disgraced father and daughter were led away through a crowd of whispering, scandalized guests, Julian Croft turned his full attention back to the young woman in the simple black uniform who stood, trembling slightly but holding her ground, with a jeweler's loop still clutched in her hand. The chaos of the dissolving party faded into a dull roar around them. For Julian, there were only two people in the room, himself and the waitress who had just saved him from making the costliest mistake of his life. The immediate aftermath was a blur of controlled chaos. Julian's security team was efficient and discreet, ushering the stunned guests out with practiced apologies about a sudden family emergency. The catering staff, including Ilara, were asked to remain. Ilara stood by the now abandoned champagne tower, her adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. She felt as though she had just run a marathon. What had she done? She had publicly humiliated two of the city's most powerful people. She had single-handedly detonated a multi-billion-dollar merger. She would be fired, of course. Blacklisted, probably. The diner would hear about it. Her GIA scholarship application would be a joke. Her life in New York was over. The thought was so overwhelming that her knees felt weak. "Miss Vance." She looked up. Julian Croft was standing before her, the ballroom now empty, save for them and his security chief, Marcus. His expression was unreadable, his posture rigid. "Please come with me," he said. It was not a request. He led her not out of the ballroom, but through a discreet door into a private study she hadn't known existed. It was a masculine, quiet space, lined with dark wood and leather-bound books. He closed the door, shutting out the noise and the wreckage of the evening. He gestured to a leather armchair. "Please, sit." Ilara perched on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He didn't sit, but instead walked to the window, staring out at the snow now falling heavily over the city lights. For a long moment, he was silent. Ilara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She braced herself for the inevitable tirade, the lawsuit, the termination. When he finally spoke, his back was still to her. "I've had my doubts about Alistair Sterling for months. He was too eager. The numbers in his company's prospectus were too perfect. My due diligence team flagged a dozen inconsistencies, but we couldn't find the smoking gun. We couldn't find the proof of intent to defraud." He turned around slowly, his eyes boring into hers. "Tonight, you handed it to me on a silver platter. That ring wasn't just a gift. It was collateral. It was part of a complex asset shuffle meant to artificially inflate his company's value before the merger. He was using his own daughter and me as pawns in a massive fraud." Ilara swallowed hard. I didn't know any of that, sir. I just knew the diamond was wrong." "You knew," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "Out of 200 of the city's wealthiest and supposedly most sophisticated people, you were the only one who saw it. Why?" It was a genuine question. He wanted to understand. "My grandfather was a jeweler," she said softly, her fingers going to the simple quartz pendant around her neck. "He taught me that every stone has a truth. You just have to know how to look for it. He's why I'm studying at the GIA. I want to be a gemologist, like him." Julian nodded slowly, processing this. He walked over to a small bar in the corner of the room and poured 2 glasses of what looked like very expensive whiskey. He handed one to her. "I don't drink, sir," she said quietly. "Tonight you do," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He sat in the chair opposite her, the silence stretching between them again. But this time it was different. It wasn't tense, it was contemplative. "You have exceptional courage, Elara," he said finally, "and an even more exceptional eye. You also cost me an engagement and a business deal worth $10 billion. Elara's blood ran cold. "And for that," he continued, raising his glass in a toast, "I am in your debt. You saved me from a catastrophic alliance and a lifetime of misery with a woman who valued a brand name over the truth. You saved my company from a fraudulent partnership, that the silence in the study was a living thing, thick and heavy, absorbing the faint, chaotic sounds from the ballroom beyond. It was a silence woven from shock, from rage, and from the deafening hum of a $10 billion deal imploding. Elara sat on the very edge of a leather armchair that was worth more than her car, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white peaks in a landscape of fear. Her caterer's apron felt like a costume, a ridiculous pretense she had forgotten to shed. She was no longer a waitress. She was no longer a student. In that moment, she felt like nothing more than a nerve ending, raw and exposed. Julian Croft stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, his back a rigid wall of bespoke tailoring. He watched the snow, now a swirling curtain of white, blanketing a city that had, just an hour ago, been his to conquer. He had not spoken a word since closing the heavy oak door. Elara's mind raced, a frantic catalogue of consequences, lawsuits for slander, professional ruin. The Sterlings were powerful, vindictive. They would not let this go. They would crush her. She had acted on instinct, on a bedrock of integrity inherited from her grandfather. But integrity didn't pay rent. It didn't pay for a mother's new furnace. Finally, he turned. His face, which had been a mask of glacial fury in the ballroom, was now something far more unsettling, intensely, analytically calm. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, swept over her, not with anger, but with a dispassionate curiosity, like a scientist examining a strange and unexpected specimen. "My security chief, Marcus, is currently compiling a timeline of Alistair Sterling's financial activities over the past 6 months," he began, his voice a low, even baritone that seemed to vibrate in the wood-paneled room. "My legal team, who I woke from their sleep 20 minutes ago, is drafting injunctions. The SEC will be receiving an anonymous but very detailed tip before sunrise. What you did tonight was not simply expose a counterfeit gem, Miss Vance. You pulled the pin on a grenade I didn't even know I was holding." He walked to the bar, his movements economical and precise. He poured a measure of amber liquid into 2 heavy crystal tumblers. "You have no idea of the scale of the fraud you have just uncovered. The ring was the keystone, a tangible, appraisable asset he was using to leverage a series of highly questionable loans, all of which would have become my company's liability the moment the merger was finalized. He wasn't just marrying off his daughter. He was attempting to perform a corporate parasite attachment." He placed one of the glasses on the small table beside her. The scent of peat and smoke wafted up. "I don't drink," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'm not offering you a drink," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I'm offering you a moment to steady your nerves before we discuss the terms of your debriefing. You are now a material witness in what will be a very significant case of corporate fraud. Drink it." It was a command, not a suggestion. She took the glass, her hand trembling slightly. The whiskey was fire and velvet, a shocking warmth that spread through her chest, chasing away some of the icy dread. He did not drink his own, but stood watching her, his expression unreadable. "Why did you do it?" he asked, the question sharp and direct. "Don't tell me about integrity or truth. I deal in a world where those are commodities, bought and sold like any other. What was your angle? Did you know who I was? Were you hoping for a reward? A moment of fame? Did someone from a rival firm put you up to it?" The questions were like a series of small, sharp blows. The cynicism was so profound, so absolute, that it momentarily eclipsed her fear. The spark of defiance she'd felt in the alley rekindled, a tiny stubborn flame. "My angle," she repeated, her voice gaining a sliver of its strength back. "My angle, Mr. Croft, was that a man was being mocked for spilling water. My angle was that his boss, your fiancé, called my grandfather's memory, the only thing I have left of him, a cheap trinket. My angle was that I was looking at a lie, a beautiful, brilliant, screaming lie, in a room full of people who were either too ignorant to see it or too polite to say anything. I am studying to be a gemologist. The truth of a stone is the entire basis of my profession. It is the only angle I have." She met his gaze directly, her own eyes flashing. "You may live in a world where truth is a commodity, but I don't, and I will not be insulted by the suggestion that my actions were for sale." For the first time, a flicker of something unidentifiable crossed his features. Surprise? Respect. He picked up his own glass, swirling the contents slowly. "Your grandfather taught you well," he said, the words softer than before. "He would have been proud, and you are correct to be offended. My apologies." The apology was so unexpected, it disarmed her completely. He took a sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers. "Nevertheless, you have created a situation. The Sterlings will attempt to discredit you. They will paint you as an opportunist, a liar, a fantasist. I will not allow that to happen. Not because I am a good man, Miss Vance, but because your credibility is now inextricably linked to my legal position. Your truth has become my weapon." He placed his glass down with a decisive click. "Therefore, I have a proposition for you. It is not a reward. It is a contract. For the next 72 hours, you will be retained by Croft Holdings as an expert consultant. You will provide my legal team with a full, written and recorded deposition detailing your analysis of the stone. You will make yourself available for any and all questions they may have. For this service, you will be compensated at a rate of $5,000 per day, plus a retainer of $50,000, effective immediately." Ilara's mind went blank. The numbers were astronomical, nonsensical. They were figures from a different reality. 50,000? It is the standard rate for an expert witness whose testimony is pivotal in a multi-billion-dollar litigation, he stated, as if discussing the weather. "The funds will be wired to an account of your choosing within the hour. I will also require your silence. You will not speak to the press. You will not post on social media. You will not discuss the events of this evening with anyone other than my legal counsel and myself. Is that understood?" She could only nod, her throat suddenly tight. "Good," he said. He then walked to the large mahogany desk and picked up a phone, dialing an extension. "Marcus, I need you to arrange a car for Miss Vance. She's to be taken home directly." "Wait." He looked at Ilara, a new thought dawning. "You don't live in a secure building, do you?" I live in a fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria," she stammered. He cursed under his breath, a sharp, frustrated sound. "No, unacceptable. Sterling is a cornered animal, and he'll be vindictive. He could send reporters, private investigators, worse." He spoke into the phone again. "Change of plans, Marcus. Book the Celestial Suite at the Croft Grand for Miss Vans. Indefinitely. Put it on my personal account. Have a full security detail posted on her floor. And send someone to her apartment to pack a bag for her. Clothes, books, personal effects. Be discreet." He listened for a moment. "I don't care what she says. Her safety is now a corporate asset. Handle it." He hung up and turned back to her. "You will stay at my hotel until my security team has neutralized any potential threat from Sterling. It is non-negotiable." This was too much. The money, the hotel suite, the bodyguards. It was a golden cage, and it was closing around her. "Mr. Croft, I can't. This isn't my life. I have classes. I have a job at a diner I need to get to tomorrow morning." "You no longer work at the diner," he said, with an air of finality. "Your employment there is terminated, as is your employment with the catering company. Consider this your new job. As for your classes, my foundation will be in touch with the GIA in the morning. A new scholarship is being created in your name. The Elara Vance Grant for Integrity in Gemology. It will provide a full ride, including living expenses, to one promising student each year. You will be its first retroactive recipient. Your student debt will be cleared by noon." She stared at him, her heart pounding a frantic, panicked rhythm. He was systematically dismantling her life and rebuilding it in his own image, with his own money, all in the space of 10 minutes. It was terrifying. It was suffocating. "Why?" she finally managed to whisper. "Why are you doing all of this?" "Because, Miss Vance," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a low, intense register. "Talent is common. Intelligence is not rare. But the courage to act on one's convictions, to speak a difficult truth in a room full of powerful lies, regardless of the personal cost, that is the rarest thing in the world. It is an asset I cannot afford to let my competitors acquire, or Alistair Sterling to destroy. I am not being kind. I am making an investment." He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as he glanced toward the window. "I was also in the alley earlier tonight. I overheard your phone call." The memory of her raw, desperate confession to her mother flooded her cheeks with heat. "My assistant has booked you on the 9 a.m. private Croft aviation jet to Burlington, Vermont, departing from Teterboro. The $50,000 retainer should be more than sufficient to cover any outstanding furnace repairs." He had seen it all, her poverty, her desperation, her pride, and he had addressed each one with the brutal, efficient precision of a CEO closing a deal. The scholarship wasn't charity. It was a grant named in her honor. The money wasn't a handout. It was a professional fee. The flight home wasn't a gift. It was a logistical component of his plan. He had constructed a narrative she could accept without shattering the pride she had so fiercely defended. Tears, hot and overwhelming, finally spilled over and traced paths down her cheeks. They were not tears of fear or sadness, but of a dizzying, terrifying, and profound gratitude. He didn't offer a handkerchief. He didn't offer a word of comfort. He simply stood there, waiting for the storm to pass. "Go home for Christmas, Elara," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "My legal team will be in touch on the 26th. Enjoy the warmth." The next morning was a study in surreal contrasts. Elara sat alone in the cabin of a Gulfstream jet, a space upholstered in cream leather and polished burled walnut, wearing the same simple black dress from the night before, now slightly rumpled. A discreet assistant from the hotel had delivered a suitcase to her suite at dawn, packed with her worn jeans, her GIA textbooks, and her grandfather's loupe, all of it looking impossibly shabby in the palatial suite. As the jet climbed above the clouds, banking south over the jagged skyline of Manhattan, she felt a profound sense of dislocation. She was leaving a city that had nearly broken her, a life of relentless struggle. But she felt no triumph. Instead, a deep-seated anxiety hummed beneath her skin. Julian Croft had not saved her. He had acquired her. She was now an asset, a piece in his grand corporate game, her future tied to his legal battle. The Alara Vance Grant. He had bought her name, her story, and woven it into the fabric of his own empire. The flight was short. Landing in Burlington was like breaking the surface of the water after being submerged for too long. The air was thin, cold, and clean, smelling of snow and pine. And there was her mother, Eleanor, standing just beyond the small terminal's gate, her face etched with worry. The sight of her, so real and familiar, was the anchor Alara desperately needed. They clung to each other, the hug a silent transfer of 1,000 unsaid things. "A man called last night," Eleanor said, as they walked to her beat-up Subaru, her voice trembling. "A Mr. Marcus. He said you were safe, that you had a family emergency, and would be home today." "Alara, what happened? Are you in trouble?" On the drive home, through winding roads flanked by snow-laden birches, Alara told her everything. She omitted no detail: the cruelty, the fear, the confrontation, the cold, calculating generosity of Julian Croft. Eleanor listened in absolute silence, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. When Alara finished, her mother didn't pull over. She just kept driving, her eyes fixed on the road for a long time. "Your grandfather," Eleanor said finally, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He had a phrase he used for men like that. Men who buy the mountain to own the diamond. They don't understand that the diamond's worth comes from the pressure, from the journey. They think its value is in the possession." She glanced at her daughter, her eyes fierce with love and concern. "This Mr. Croft, he thinks he's bought the diamond. You have to remember, honey, that you are the mountain." Christmas was quiet, poignant. The house was blessedly, profoundly warm, the new furnace humming a quiet tune of security. The check, the retainer, had been deposited, a number so large it looked like a typo on the banking app. It erased a decade of debt in a single transaction, a fact so overwhelming they could barely speak of it. On Christmas afternoon, Ilara's phone, a new encrypted model delivered by Julian's assistant along with her suitcase, buzzed with a text. Statement was flawless. "My legal team is impressed. Sterling's assets have been frozen by federal order. The grenade, as it were, did its job. Well done. JC." She found herself smiling, a small, genuine smile. For all his coldness, he had given her credit. He had said, "Well done." She typed a reply. "Glad I could be of assistance. Merry Christmas, Mr. Croft." A moment later, a response. "The sentiment is appreciated. And Alara, it's Julian." The new year was not a new beginning, but a strange gilded limbo. Alara returned not to her Astoria walk-up, which had been deemed insecure, but to the silent luxury of the Croft Grand. She finished her final semester at the GIA, chauffeured to and from class in a black town car that made her fellow students stare. The grant had made her a minor celebrity on campus. The story spun by the Croft PR machine, a carefully edited tale of a brilliant student discovered by the Foundation's talent scouts. She was an object of envy and speculation, and she had never felt more isolated. She met with Julian's lawyers twice a week in sterile conference rooms, recounting the events of that night until the words lost all meaning. She learned the full scope of Sterling's deception, a dizzying shell game of offshore accounts and falsified appraisals. Her testimony was the linchpin, the single, unimpeachable piece of evidence that proved fraudulent intent. She saw Julian only occasionally. He would appear in the conference room, listen intently for an hour, ask a few incisive questions, and vanish. He never mentioned their conversation in the study. He was her employer, distant and demanding. Yet, she felt his influence everywhere. A rare text asking for her opinion on the auction specs of a Patek Philippe watch, an obscure gemological treatise, out of print for 50 years, appearing on her desk, delivered by a courier. He was testing her, observing her, cultivating his investment. The day of her graduation, she walked across the stage to collect her diploma, her mother cheering from the audience. As she walked back to her seat, she saw him, standing in the shadows at the back of the auditorium, his arms crossed. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes held a look of keen, proprietary satisfaction. He gave her a single, sharp nod, and then he was gone. The following Monday, she reported for her first day of work. Her office at Croft Holdings was on the 80th floor, a corner suite with a view that stretched from the Statue of Liberty to the Bronx. Her name was on the door in small gold letters: Elara Vance, Director, Department of Acquisitions and Provenance. The department consisted of her. The office was empty, save for a large desk, a state-of-the-art gemological microscope, and a single file folder lying in the exact center of the desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a dossier on a necklace known as the Tears of the Maratha, a string of perfectly matched, deep green emeralds, rumored to have been looted from a royal Indian treasury during the British Raj. It was coming up for a private sale in Geneva. At the bottom of the page, a handwritten note in black ink. Are they real, or are they just another beautiful lie? Jay. It wasn't a job offer. It was a challenge. It was the beginning. Her life found a new rhythm, one of quiet, intense focus. She built her department, hiring the brightest graduates she could find. She traveled the world, London, Hong Kong, Dubai, a quiet, unassuming woman in a simple suit, armed with a loupe and an encyclopedic knowledge that made seasoned auctioneers nervous. She became Julian Croft's shadow weapon, the guardian of his empire's authenticity. Their relationship remained professional, an intricate dance of respect and distance. The conversations were about assets and authenticity, about history and value. But slowly, something else began to build in the spaces between the words. He started asking her opinion on art, on architecture, on corporate strategy. He valued not just her expertise, but her perspective, the perspective of someone who saw the world not in terms of profit and loss, but of truth and falsehood. One evening, nearly a year after that fateful night, she was working late, poring over the spectrographic analysis of a rare Burmese ruby. He appeared in her doorway, as he often did, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. This time she didn't refuse. "The Sterling case settled today," he said, handing her a glass. He took a plea. 10 years. He'll be out in 5. Tiffany is living in Monaco on what was left of her trust fund. "Is it over then?" she asked. "For them it is," he said, moving to the window to look out at the city lights. "But for us, I find myself with a new problem." "What's that?" He turned to face her, and in the soft glow of her desk lamp, the calculated armor of the billionaire seemed to fall away, leaving the weary, lonely man from the alley. "Authenticity," he said, his voice quiet. "You've taught me to see it in objects, Elara, to spot the flawless, empty narrative of the synthetic, to value the story told by the inclusions, the imperfections. The problem is, I've started applying that standard to people, to my life, and I'm discovering how much of it is a high-pressure, high-temperature synthetic." He took a step closer, his eyes holding hers. "I have a board meeting in Aspen next week. The mountains will be covered in snow. The air will be clean. It's a world away from all of this." He gestured to the glittering false city below. "I need someone there who can tell the difference between a real asset and a beautiful lie. I need my director of provenance." It was a business request, a summons from her boss, but it was also something more. It was an invitation, not to a fairy tale romance, but to a partnership forged in a moment of crisis, built on a foundation of shared truth, and now, finally, hinting at a future that was not about possession, but about a shared journey. Elara looked from his searching eyes to the city spread out below her, a tapestry of 1,000,000 different lives. A year ago, she had been one of its most insignificant threads. Now, she held the power to discern its truths. She had not been given a miracle. She had been given a choice, and then another, and another. And she had chosen, every time, to be the mountain. "I'll have my bags packed," she said, her voice steady and clear. "When do we leave?"